Deconverted Man here, and I've got a person by the name of Wisdom in the Lord. Do we have a shorter name for you to go
Alex.
by? Okay, Alex, and I forgot once again to turn off my background YouTube playing, so I got a nice little echo there in my head. All right, so we're going to debate is Yahweh of the Judeo-Christian Bible real? So I guess you could say God, but I was trying to figure, well, which God, and so I wanted to make sure we knew that. So I'm going to open, and he's going to present an opening, and then we're going to rebuttal each other's opening and go from there. I think a couple rounds, and then have a closing, and then some Q&A from anybody that happens to be in chat, and if not, or with each other.
Okay.
So that's what's gonna happen. All right. So let me get my thing up here. And he didn't want to go first, so I'm going first, I guess. Is Yahweh of the Judeo-Christian Bible real? First, what is real? Do we mean real in the sense of the person Ahab from the classic Moby Dick being real? Or do we mean real as in George Washington? Also, do we mean that this person exists today, as you and I do, or that they once existed in the past, as the dinosaurs did? Being that I'm a pragmatic amateur logistician, when I say the word real, I'm referring to real as you, me, George Washington, and Neil deGrasse Tyson. But that doesn't mean that they may be alive today. They could have perished for all I know. Today's idea of Yahweh is informed by current modern Christians, broadly speaking. They have told themselves and us what their idea of God is. That is the God, a singular God, monotheistic. Most hold to some sort of Trinitarian concept of God where Yahweh is the Father, Jesus is the Son, and the Holy Ghost is involved. The concept of this God has changed over time. So is the God written about in the Bible the same God as we're talking about? I don't know. Each and every Christian has their own perspective on what and who that God is. And they use whatever scripture and understanding of said scripture to promote their own doctrines and dogma of and about their concept of God. Yahweh is a combination of gods that came before it and or part of the gods of current time that was held up higher by the Jewish people. The history of where the name itself came from and if it did or did not have a wife at one point is debated. Of course, if one wants to say that Yahweh is real, then admitting that it's a combination of past God concepts or an outright invention might seem rather foolish. Yet, hypothetically, one could admit this and simply say that just because we know it's made up does not mean that it's in fact made up. The genetic fallacy being used in that way is an apologetic trope. Did humans invent this God, Yahweh? Perhaps so, but it could still be real. However, I would say that we should be a bit more skeptical that something could be real if we identify that humans played some role in making up any given idea. I will submit that no deity can be real if that deity conflicts with what we understand about our universe. A deity that requires you to think that 1 + 1 = 1,000 is not and cannot be real, because 1 + 1 does not and cannot equal 1,000. 1 + 1 = 2, and that is that. If and only if your God is down with that and cool with that, can we even accept the possibility that that God is real? If your dogma or doctrine of God says that the earth is younger or older than current scientific understanding says, then that God is not and cannot be real. If your God requires a denial of biological evolution or the shape of the earth or the rotation of the earth and the sun and the solar system, then that God must be false. If your idea of God requires us to reject any and all understanding that is scientific, we should assert your God is false and impossible, unless you submit that your God is in fact incoherent. Any incoherent gods would be ones we could not trust in, nor ones we would expect any logical argument for. Thus, if one wants to submit an incoherent god, then they need no argument at all. Faith and faith alone, blind with no evidence or hope of evidence, would be what is required for such a god. I might suggest the Bible itself hints at faith being so important that one wonders if the Bible is trying to tell us that the God of the Bible is incoherent and thus faith is required for it. If so, then one could think that that God is real if it is incoherent and requires faith and has zero evidence for it. For if you had any evidence, you would not need any faith. Yet to say that such a thing is real would still require something more than mere words. Words alone cannot be enough to say that something is real. What we lack for the Yahweh God is exactly what we lack for any and all God concepts that I'm aware of, and that is the following: empirical evidence, repeatable tests, and or a valid and sound argument. Empirical evidence. By empirical, I mean observed directly, not just with the naked eye, but with any sort of instrument available from the category of science. Magnetic waves shown by machines, so can electric current, heat, cold, X-rays, infrared, ultraviolet, the very small, the very far away, all can be observed using some sort of machinery. And this is direct. You're looking at the something, not something that infers that object or phenomenon at hand. You're looking directly at the darn thing. Repeatable tests. By this, I'm referring to the scientific method. We use that to reduce or eliminate the possibility that something's being faked. It's not an illusion, sleight of hand, or other trickery of some sort, and it's really happening in some measurable way. An example of this sort of test actually appears in the Bible in 1 Kings 18. Here we have the story of Elijah and the people who worship Baal. Elijah challenges the Baal worshippers to a test. Whose God will answer? The Baal people try to get their wood to be set on fire without doing it themselves. Baal's people pray and nothing happens. Elijah prays once and only once, and boom, fire to the wood. Pwned those Baal worshippers. Showed them, and then of course Elijah kills them anyways. That will really teach them a lesson, I suppose. But my point is this: we're told by many Christians today that God never changes. Okay, so let's do this same test today. Get some wood, ask God to light it aflame, but do it in a controlled setting where we can make sure 100% that there's no trickery involved, no lightning from above, no tricks, whatever. Then do it again in a different lab and repeat it, and then it would become science, and it would serve as some sort of proof of your God claim to some extent. No such test has ever been tried. We are told instead, thou shalt not test the Lord thy God. Oh, well, darn. A valid and sound argument is one that has the correct format and is also free of logical fallacies. Should the format be wrong, I could perhaps forgive that, but I'm a stickler for such things, so I won't. But what matters more is the fact that it has logical errors or not. If it does not, then great. But if it has even one logical fallacy, and I or anyone else identifies that error, then the conclusion cannot be reached, and we must view the conclusion with skepticism. Within the confines of logic, we cannot say the conclusion is false, but we must be skeptical that it is true, else we forego logic altogether. If we had one or all three of these things for Yahweh, then we would agree that Yahweh is real. However, at the moment, as I say these words, I'm unaware of any empirical evidence, repeatable tests, and or valid and sound arguments for this God, let alone any other God. I await my opponent to provide one of these three things to change my mind on the matter. Until then, I will submit the following syllogism for the current concept of Yahweh. This works if and only if one wants a coherent God concept, a God that falls in lines with logic rather than absurd God. Premise 1. Yahweh must not use illogical ideas to be a rational God. Premise 2. Only rational gods could even hope to exist in our rational world. Premise 3. Yahweh offers humans an ad balium and an appeal to a bribe, i.e. heaven and hell. Conclusion: Yahweh is not a rational God and thus does not exist in our rational world. My opponent must show a logical fallacy to be present in any of my premises in order to be skeptical of the conclusion via the rules of logic. Failing that, my opponent can submit that his God concept is irrational. That concludes my opening.
Okay, that's a pretty interesting take on things, Dan. Okay, so you did address that people tend to use their own doctrine to get their version of God. That is very true, unfortunately. So I'm going to not do that. I'm going to do sola scriptura, just what's in the Bible or what's in history. I'm getting no theology from anything else. Okay. Let me see. What else? You mentioned that that God cannot go beyond the natural realm of the world, or at least that the God cannot defy logic. I find this really odd for atheists, considering that we can prove philosophically that the universe had a beginning, that there was nothing, absolutely nothing, and yet you guys still tend to say that everything came from nothing. It reminds me of a G.K. Chesterton quote, if I can find it here. There it is. It is absurd for the evolutionist to complain that it is unthinkable for an admittedly unthinkable God to make everything out of nothing, and then pretend that it is more thinkable that nothing should turn itself into everything. So I find that a bit odd, but I'll ignore that for now. Then you mentioned that the God can also not go against anything that is scientific, such as evolution. I would also like to point out that evolution is not a fact, it is merely a theory. And if there's ever been a theory with more holes in it, then that theory would have to have been shot with buckshot. I just can't imagine. And then we've got this. So you said that empirical evidence, repeatable tests, and there could be no logical errors in proving God exists. So empirical evidence, of course, would be stuff that is tangible. Now, I will present some of that. That is what I'm mainly doing, and that is in regards to the resurrection. Because after all, Jesus claimed to be God multiple times. I will cite some references in that. And also, if he rose from the dead and he claimed to be God, Yahweh, I am, then we can see that, yes, Yahweh is real. Now, repeatable tests on that front, yes, the Bible does say that you shall not test the Lord your God. And I do agree with this. Because after all, we have more than enough evidence to look at, empirical evidence, to show that there must be a God. Now, no logical errors. Again, I can't help but notice that a lot of the things you use in your worldview tend to have a lot of logical errors. I'm not assuming that you subscribe to the full thing of atheism, but I'm going to assume that you have some main points. Now, I would like you to show me some logical errors so I can actually see if they are errors, if I can explain them, or if they actually remain as errors. And if there's one logical error with God and you deny, or you're at least very skeptical of God, why do you subscribe to evolution, which has multiple problems? So now I'm going to address what I'm going to be talking about for my evidence that Yahweh is real. I will first address that that there are multiple philosophical arguments, such as the fact that science has shown, and philosophy, we can determine that there must have been a beginning. After all, an apple comes from a tree comes from a seed, and the seed uses nutrients and whatnot, and we have all these causes, but we can't have an infinite amount of causes. Therefore, there must be a beginning, because if there's an infinite amount of causes, we never reach this current point in time. It just doesn't work at all. There's also mathematical problems with there being an infinite universe. After all, that does not manifest in the physical world. Second, what I will address is the attributes of God that the God Yahweh is seen to have. He is seen to be an infinite, spaceless, immaterial, timeless, powerful, personal God. Now, he has to be spaceless, immaterial, and timeless because, after all, a material God would have to be created. And if there is no material, you can actually see this in multiple atheists who say this as well, that before the universe existed, before anything was here, when there was absolutely nothing, there was nothing at all. No time, no space, nothing. So the God would have to be immaterial, spaceless, timeless, extremely powerful to even create anything at all. Because after all, we've advanced so much, and yet we still can't even create a single atom. We can't produce a single bit of life. We can't do anything. So there's that also. And then personal, he would have to be a personal God. I actually forgot why I put this one down. So I will see this during your, I'll look at this while you go over your rebuttal, and then I'll bring it up later. So basically, that's the attributes of Yahweh. And then what we then have is Jesus, because Jesus is probably the biggest thing of empirical evidence we ever had. So Jesus claimed to be God. He claimed this multiple times, such as in Mark 14, verse 61 through 62, when the high priests were questioning him. And he said, I am. I am is the Jewish translation for Yahweh. And he also said, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Now, no one was ever said to be sitting at the right hand of God, ever, because that would imply that he was of equal stature. They had people standing, but never sitting. That is why he got crucified. Later, and then also in John 8:56, he said, very, very truly, I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am. Another I am statement. Now, there are a few others, but I'm just going to go with these two for now. So then we have the evidence for the resurrection. Now, first off, I would like to point out that it is historical fact that Jesus did exist. We have more evidence that Jesus existed than Alexander the Great existed, because after all, the documents showing that Jesus existed turned up. They started being written down within 30 years of the crucifixion. Now, also the same thing for the resurrection within 30 years. Mark, I believe, was the first gospel. So, but anyway, so evidence for the resurrection. There were multiple eyewitnesses. He also had a death by crucifixion. So this is evidence number one that needs to be done so that people actually realize that he did die. Because for those of you who don't know, I can explain this later, crucifixion is an extremely, extremely terrible way to kill someone, and most people who were even, like some people who were even taken down from the crosses, still died. And let me see what else. Also, ladies found the tomb empty. when they went to go put stuff on the body and whatnot. When they visited the tomb, they found it empty. And this is another thing that scholars look at because it is the criterion of embarrassment. Ladies found the tomb, it wasn't men. It's not so much trusted if it's ladies back then. And then we have multiple independent appearances of Jesus to people. There was the disciples, there was to the women at the tomb, and there was another one in which he appeared to more than 500. So there's that. And then there was the violence endured by the apostles. So this is something to basically show that I'll address it later, but there was violence endured by the apostles, and the enemies of Christ were converted, such as Paul. He went to his death for Christ. So the thing is that if this was a conspiracy theory, not all this would happen. There's a saying, I forget where, liars make poor martyrs. So anyway, yep, so that's what I got for now.
Okay. Well, this begins my rebuttal, and first I have to point out the formal fallacy that my opponent committed, which I'll let my audience know if they've forgotten. A formal fallacy is one occurs when you break from the rules of logic. It doesn't matter for the argument itself, but it is something to note because it could suggest that the person is not aware of the rules of logic. In this case, my opponent had decided to include a rebuttal within his opening statement. This is an incorrect format. His opening must stand on its own, not be a rebuttal to mine opening. Having said that, and since it's not relevant to whether his argument is sound or not, he mentions things in the Bible, which is circular, because we need proof that the Bible is anything that we can rely upon. He mentioned history, but gave no proof that history supports anything that's in the Bible. No reference to it. He asserted that it was odd to say that God could not go beyond the natural world. I didn't quite say that. I said that if you want to admit that God is incoherent, you're welcome to do so. In that case, you don't need an argument, but then you must admit that there's no evidence for God. Thus, I win this debate. He asserted that we can use philosophy to prove the universe had a beginning. No, we can't use that to prove anything because philosophy does not work in that manner, nor do arguments prove things. Arguments are not proof. He strawmanned atheists by claiming that atheists say that the universe came from nothing. No atheist that I'm aware of has ever made such a claim. The closest you can get might be Lawrence Krauss, but what he means by nothing, I do not think is what my opponent means by nothing. Evolution is not a fact, he says. It's a theory, along with gravity, the theory of radiation, the theory of atomic nuclear force, the theory of magnetism, the theory of electromagnetic current, the theory of... He doesn't understand the word theory in science. We shouldn't be surprised because, after all, he's a Christian and probably has been indoctrinated against understanding science and what the word theory means in science. Not anything new there. He talks about the resurrection, which cannot have been shown to happen, so this is not and cannot be empirical evidence by any stretch of the imagination. I do not see with my own eyeballs or any other mechanism that one could invent the past, nor do I see Jesus getting killed in front of me right here and now. So that fails on empirical evidence and what that word means as I defined it already. He said the evolution has multiple problems. No, it doesn't. You don't understand the science. Then goes on to say that things have causes, that we can't have an infinite regress. Why not? Would be one question. But that the universe had to have a beginning. Well, kind of, but kind of not. there's a couple problems with this chain of reasoning. First of all, cause and effect only works up until the T1 event of the universe. At that point, physics as we understand it breaks down. Now, I'm not willing to say that logic also breaks down, but I don't know what that universe is like because, well, physics can't even hope to describe it. So how can I hope to describe it using logic? It might be that cause and effect no longer functions in such a universe. I don't know. However, Hawking, as well as other cosmologists, have suggested that there is no before, that time wraps in on itself, and you have to have things called imaginary time to make sense of it. And at that point, he loses me because it's science that's simply beyond my understanding. But there you have it. You have a potential answer that's difficult to comprehend versus a simple answer. God done it. He asserts that there was a nothing before the universe. No, there is no before the universe. And no, the sort of nothing that I think my opponent is referring to does not even exist. Or if it does, needs to be shown that it's a thing. This philosophical concept of nothing, which is an absence of everything, would have no rules to it. So there'd be literally nothing to stop nothing from doing anything that it wanted. But it might be the fact of the way reality functions that once you take away everything else, you still are left with an unsteady state, which wouldn't be the philosophical term of nothing, but might be what nothing actually is like. It's odd for us to conceive of such a nothing, but Cross goes into great detail in his books about that. That we cannot do X thing. We can't create atoms or whatever. It's irrelevant. Besides that, even if we could, then the theist could always just backpedal and say, aha, it took an intelligence to create life. Aha, intelligent design. Aha. Jesus, not empirical evidence. Jesus made claims. So what? Circular. Rest of this is irrelevant and circular. More claims of the Bible, all circular and irrelevant. Evidence of the resurrection is not a historical fact, nor is Jesus existing a historical fact. This is in debate, and it is debatable. Within 30 years? No, it's a little bit later than that, but even if it was on the day that it happened, when it was written is not relevant. Multiple eyewitnesses, even if that was true and we could confirm it, would be irrelevant because of groupthink. And this is, again, circular reasoning. Apostles underwent violence, also irrelevant, even if true, because torture does not make people change their mind necessarily. In fact, now I'd be interested if there was a study to show that torture could change people's minds, but we don't have that as far as I know, but we do have the past. For example, the Inquisition that the Christians committed upon several different people, and people would not relent. They would not repent. They would not convert. They chose to die with whatever beliefs they had or no belief at all, rather than convert to Christianity, even though that meant, well, still death, but no more torture. We'll just kill you outright rather than keep torturing you. They chose instead to hold steady to whatever ideas they had. In other words, they weren't even willing to lie to end the torture. Also, torture has never been shown to be an effective means of extracting any information. So it doesn't matter even if the apostles actually existed and actually underwent various forms of horrible things. It doesn't matter, because if they had a belief for whatever reason, they wouldn't relent from that belief. Or if they were simply propagating a thing that they knew to be false, they wouldn't relent from that under torture, because torture doesn't change people's minds. People willing to die for beliefs happens everywhere at all times for all sorts of beliefs, and it does not and cannot validate that belief as true. Now, my opponent's rebuttal, which is coming up, he must rebuttal my syllogism and or opening argument, but I would suggest that he stick to the syllogism. And if he cannot or will not do that, well, what argument did we have for his side? I didn't hear a single logical, coherent argument. No empirical evidence was presented, and we were told that God will not allow testing. So there goes that one as a possible way to show that this thing exists. That concludes my first rebuttal.
Okay, Dan. I see how this is going to go. Okay. Okay, so where is it? Here we are. So you said that Jesus the historical Jesus rising from the dead is not empirical evidence. I find this really odd. So how do you believe in literally anything prior to cameras and videos? I don't understand at all. This just makes no sense to me. Also, you talked about how the witnesses has nothing to do with anything because of groupthink. So I don't understand your view of groupthink, because groupthink is having to do with making decisions more based on how others, based on wanting to agree with others. Groupthink doesn't make you have a completely different memory or a new memory that just is not there before. I mean, because if they were even a slight bit unsure, they would definitely have given in when they were tortured. And yes, torture is not good for getting information. Torture is definitely a pretty good thing for making people recant a statement. I mean, it's less so for a religious statement, but then again, it still is. But I have a question. Name one person who actually decided to die for their beliefs that they knew were false in relation to some sort of thing like this. So it's like some people will die for beliefs that they don't know, but these were people who actually saw. So that's my question. And lastly, didn't you say that we weren't going to do personal attacks? This isn't exactly no personal attacks when you call me brainwashed. And yes, the law of gravity is a law.
Is that it?
Yep.
Okay. So this is my second rebuttal, and I must point out to the audience again that my opponent has committed a formal fallacy. This time he has rebutted to my rebuttal rather than my opening statement. He asserts Jesus rising from the dead again and questions why this is not empirical evidence, because I already defined what empirical evidence was. It must be observed directly, either by the naked eye or by some other mechanical device. The question of how I believe in X, Y, or Z without cameras is irrelevant. I defined that I want empirical evidence for this thing. Either you admit that you do not have empirical evidence, or you provide something else in its place. You did not do this. Groupthink does not do X. Okay, that's interesting. I don't think that you understand how groupthink works, but nevertheless, show me that groupthink does not do that if you can. If you can't, well, perhaps we'll let that one go. Torture makes people recant. Where's the proof of that? You ask a loaded and irrelevant question. Name one person who died for a belief they knew were false. This is question begging and appeal to personal incredulity. It says that the people in the Bible said that they saw it. Prove it. When did I call him brainwashed? Never that I recall. I do not think I uttered the word brainwashed ever in my entire speech so far, so I've not committed an ad hominem. This concludes my second and final rebuttal. This leads into our closing arguments, where I would highly suggest to my opponent that he attack my syllogism, which he's left untouched, rather than my rebuttals. But if he doesn't want to do that, that's up to him. This concludes my rebuttal.
Okay. So let me see if I can find where you called me brainwashed real quick. Okay, one moment.
As a note to my audience, we did agree to give each other a certain amount of time for rebuttals. So if you're wondering why I'm allowing him to do this, it's because we've agreed upon this time limit. So I made the mistake of not informing my audience of the agreed upon conditions of the debate. So I do apologize for that formal fallacy that I've committed, failing to inform my audience properly of the format of the debate.
Okay, and here, let me see if I can make it so you can actually hear when you called me brainwashed. The device is connected. Let me see. And she's not working. Here. Okay, let me. Goodbye.
That occurred. The theory of he doesn't understand the word theory in science. We shouldn't be surprised because, after all, he's a Christian and probably has been indoctrinated against understanding science and what the word theory means in science.
We shouldn't be surprised because he's a Christian and has probably been indoctrinated, i.e., brainwashed into thinking. Seriously? Seriously. Just why? Now, yes, I am very confused with you. One, you lied at the beginning saying that you weren't going to attack me personally. That was a lie. Second, let's go with this.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. Okay, which breaks from our agreed upon formatting. But I'm going to stop you because you called me a liar. I'm not going to have that. No, I did not attack you, and I did not say brainwash. You were incorrect. Indoctrinated against science is not the same as brainwash. However, if you want to submit,
you're indoctrinated against some.
Okay, so you're agreeing that indoctrination is brainwashing. Very well. Then Christianity is brainwashing then, because you have to indoctrinate to get people into Christianity, don't you? You're not just born knowing you're a Christian, are you?
You're indoctrinating something.
So, okay, so will you agree that Christianity is brainwashing then?
No, because
okay, then do not say what I didn't say.
You're something that's true. If you're brainwashing someone, you're indoctrinating them against something.
Have you been indoctrinated against science? Have you been told that this is false?
That what's false?
That evolution is false.
I did. I researched.
Have you been told? Have you been told that evolution is flawed or false or anything like that? Yes or no?
See, let me explain.
Have you been told that? Yes or no?
Let me explain.
I want a straight answer. Yes or no?
Did I not just say yes?
You have been told that. Okay. So is that indoctrination?
I was younger.
Is that indoctrination?
Personally.
Is that indoctrination?
Myself.
Is that indoctrination? Yes or no?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so is indoctrination equal brainwashed? Then Christianity is brainwashing. Thank you for proving my point. I did not say brainwash, however, and I will not be called a liar on my channel. Okay? I did not attack you. I attacked your beliefs. I am attacking the idea that people will be and have been indoctrinated against science, as you clearly have been. Because you don't understand biological evolution, and if your God concept requires us to deny biological evolution or any other things in science, we have to deny your God. So does your God concept...
Evolution has no evidence that I have seen.
Okay, so now you want evidence that you can see, but you reference Jesus, who we cannot see. So which is it?
Jesus is historical evidence. If you
No,
cannot...
it's not historical evidence. It's a myth that's told by people, written in a story that we can't confirm.
Exactly how many historians actually don't believe
It's irrelevant.
in Jesus? Basically 100% believe in Jesus.
No, you're wrong. And no, they don't. No.
Yes, they do.
Show me. Where? Who?
Yes,
Name them.
I have not seen a single historian. And
You've not seen in personal credulity. Okay. Does your God concept require us to deny biological evolution? Yes or no?
Does biological evolution go against...
Does your God concept require us to deny biological evolution?
Does biological evolution...
Does your God concept require us to deny or disagree with biological evolution? Yes or no?
Is macroevolution true? No.
Okay, so you're not going to answer my question. We're done. You have failed, by the way, multiple times now to address my syllogism, which means it still stands. But I won't be called a liar on my channel. Now, you either retract that statement and we can go to final remarks where I, again, should implore you to attack my syllogism, which you haven't done, or we can end this right now. Which do you want to do? End this now and we're done and I don't talk to you again, or retract that I'm a liar. Pick one.
I can't retract the true statement. I'm sorry.
Goodbye. We're done. I'm not talking to you again. And I will say, for my audience, this has been a indoctrinated, which he admitted was basically brainwashed, Christian against science and understanding the theory, what that word means. It doesn't surprise me, nor should it surprise anybody else. He wants to call that brainwashing. Fine, that Christianity is brainwashing. In fact, I have a whole book.
Brainwashed to think that the universe can come from nothing, which goes against scientific law.
Nobody says that. We're done. You're out of here. Bye. Boom. Gone. I'm done. He called me a liar. He's not on my channel anymore. I don't welcome him back. Well, the debate concludes. My opponent could not and would not deal with my syllogism, so it stands on its own. Failed to provide any decent syllogism of his own. Failed to provide empirical evidence. Failed to provide any sort of repeatable test. In fact, admitted that God has no test and will not let us test it, which, of course, conflicts with God. And essentially would not answer the question of whether his God requires us to deny biological evolution, which means that his God potentially requires us to deny an aspect of reality, which means we must think that that God is not true. The only reasonable conclusion using the methodology of logic and science that we can make is that his concept of Yahweh is not real in any sense other than as a fictional character that somebody invented at some point. It's sad to see that a person would be so ignorant of science, but it's not surprising. I will now take questions from the audience directed at me. If anyone thinks I was unfair in booting out my opponent because he called me a liar, which I won't stand for, or if anyone wants to say an actual argument for God or anything else, I'll have them on instead. Let's see. So let's go ahead and look at the chat. Let's see. Where did this child come from? I commented on a video of his. It was horrible audio where he was complaining that an atheist made a bad argument. I couldn't tell if the atheist did or did not make a bad argument because I couldn't understand the audio. So I said, hey, debate me. And he did. And I annihilated him with logic, but I'll leave that for you to decide. There's claims made of there being nothing before the creation of the universe. We just don't know. Quantum theory is still battling that one. That's true. There's many hypotheses regarding this. So at best, we have an unanswered question that theists want to assert God into, which is nothing more than God of the gaps. But even if we were to say, fine, it's a philosophical nothing, for whatever reason, we'll just assert that, pretend that it's true. and that the only thing that can hope to fill that would be the opposite of everything that we understand, which is physical matter, etc. Well, then how can a non-physical thing have a mind at all? We wouldn't have an answer to that question. We wouldn't have an answer to where this thing has power or how that power works, since power, as we understand it, only works in the physical universe. So we'd have more unanswered and unanswerable questions than we would before, and they'd just multiply from there. And, of course, we'd be basing it all on assertions, not evidence. We have more evidence that Gone with the Wind happened than the New Testament. Well, yeah, we don't have more evidence of any of Jesus existing than anyone else. This is a tried and true apologist trope that's never been borne out to be shown that it's true. Seems young, but what do I know? Yeah, I don't know how it is. I don't care. Doesn't matter. The argument matters. Let's see. Hard to find any reference to Jesus in Roman records of the time. It's impossible to find reference to Jesus. There's a whole article that's called "The Silence That Screams" that I'll link for you to check out and for others to check out as well if they haven't already. And basically, it covers historians and political commenters and other people that were actively writing before, during, and immediately after Jesus' death, and all of them are completely silent about anything that's happening. There's no mention of a star in the sky, no mention of an earthquake, no mention of the sun going dark, no mention of zombies, no mention of a large group of people following some guy around. It's just silence. Let's see, what else? What a non-comeback. I'm guessing that's in reference to my thing. I feel sorry for this kid. I hope he learns as well as others. Yeah, well, I do feel sorry for those who have been indoctrinated, which he admitted was brainwashing, which therefore means Christianity is brainwashing. But that still wouldn't be an attack on his person. Calling him brainwashed is not an attack on him. It's not his fault he's brainwashed, and he could be brainwashed and still have a logical argument. It would become an attack on him had I said because he is indoctrinated against science, therefore his conclusion is false. I didn't say that. I just said that we shouldn't be surprised that it's the case. Regrettable Christian faith, indoctrination, and removal of scientific curiosity in kids. It is very, very regrettable, and that's why we must continue to fight the good fight and educate as much as we can. Evolution is a scientific fact. Yes, it's called a theory. If you don't understand what theory means, look it up. It's very easy to follow. It's easy to understand what scientific theory is. If no one has any questions for me directly or any comments to me at me directly about this debate, then I'll conclude, because I had to end it with him calling me a liar. I won't tolerate that. He said I said a word that I didn't say, which is a straw man. And then when revealed what it was, I did say it. It just makes his arguments, well, anyways. So anyone have any questions for me? Last chance. Going once, going twice. Okay. Well, thank you for your time and energy and listening to this, whatever this was. This was one-sided debate versus somebody that doesn't understand the formal rules of debate or even how to form a coherent anything. Did we have empirical evidence? Nope. Did we have a repeatable test? Nope. Did we have a valid and sound argument from him? No. So we must be skeptical of his conclusions. And because my argument went unchallenged and nobody showed a logical fallacy, we must agree with my conclusion, which Yahweh is not real. Thank you.